Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Jim Smith. I'm the lead architect for Spectrum Protect. Today we're going to give you an update on data protection for VMware 8.1, which we recently released, and we're going to talk about really the process because there's so much change in 8.1 introduced in the way that you interact with the product to get yourself into that productive use state where you're protecting a large estate of virtual machines in a vSphere environment. So we're going to kind of walk you through philosophically how that's working now with 8.1, introduce the new capabilities that we delivered in 8.1 and introduce them in the context of how they fit into somebody getting started with the product, getting the product to a productive daily use state. And that we're going to notice very quickly that the vSphere web client plays now a very prominent role in the user interaction. So we'll start off with, as we need to start off with every problem, a good use case, and then we'll walk through the getting started experience from the IBM perspective and walking you through just learning about the product to install, and then really focus on how do I get myself to, I've got the product installed, how do I get myself to that productive state? We talked to, in the last couple of years actually, we've been evolving this product, especially around this focus area today. And we've reached out to a lot of customers and talked to them about their problems and really their desires, and tried to work backwards and talk about what their real problem was. And we noticed a very strong pattern with all customers, and that is this is a sample environment from a business partner. We didn't ask them about their environment. We asked them to send us their option files, send us their schedules, and we kind of worked back from the definitions that they had created. We said, here's your general environment, here are the patterns we see. And this was very typical. The size of this picture may or may not be the size of your environment. We think this is pretty exemplary, 600 virtual machines. We've certainly seen thousands of virtual machines. We've certainly seen customers with 50, 100 virtual machines. And you might have one or more data centers. The real critical bit about this particular slide is every customer we talked to did not have to back up every single virtual machine. We found, in fact, when we dug into this a little more, that the pattern was in 95, 98% of the virtual machines, they're backing them up. And in fact, most customers have one policy, 14 days, 30 days, whatever it is. And then there's the exceptions, which is the crux of the whole problem. The problem we found with the customers was not, I need to back up 600 machines. It was, I don't need to back up 5% or 3% of 600 machines. Or I have a couple machines that have a different retention policy than 30 days. I need to keep them 90 days. Or some other exception. So that was really the challenge. It wasn't how to back up at scale, but it was really to make exceptions to that policy. It became the problem that we were out to solve. Now, first of all, we listened to customer requirements, and this is how you used to do this before. It was certainly possible to manage that, but you had to do it by editing multiple option files. And this is actually an option file. I didn't make this up. This is from a PMR. This is how complex some of the instructions in the option file became. And this was a user trying to make exceptions or trying to show exactly what VMs they wanted backed up explicitly. Again, we took a step back and said, what are you really trying to do? This was the answer, this previous slide. Well, this is what we're trying to do. We've got a big environment, and we have a policy that fits 95%, and we just need to manage those exceptions. So essentially, instead of delivering all this stuff that was being asked for explicitly, we took a step back and said, okay, let's talk about, we're going to solve this problem for you, but let's just take a look at the getting started experience from learning about the product all the way to managing data protection policy, managing that slide that I showed you, getting yourself into that steady state where schedules are running every day, you're just monitoring schedules and trying to take care of periodic failures or whatever. So the first thing you'll notice is we have a couple personas. The gentleman in green is Kev. He represents our VMware administrator, and the gentleman in blue is Brad. He represents our Spectrum Protect administrator. And there's obviously learning steps. You learn about the product. There's planning steps. the Spectrum Protect server has to plan for 600 virtual machines, tens of terabytes of data are going to be ingested now. So obviously the Spectrum Protect architect has to size the server correctly, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And Kev, the VM administrator, has to think about, well, I need these engines, these things we call data movers, that have to pull data out of data stores that represent virtual machines and move them to Spectrum Protect. I obviously need to size those. Then there's the installation step. There's the installation step of the Data Protection for VMware suite. And that's something that we focused on a few years ago in version 7.1. There's an installation configure step. There might be, we'll talk a little bit about verifying the environment. And then once the product's installed, this is point 7, is we're going to spend most of the time today, is how do you define that data protection policy to fit that slide that I showed up front. And that was the focus, this last step was the focus of version 8.1, data protection for VMware. So real quick, now we have to start thinking that we know about the product, we've acquired the product, we have to start thinking about what's the Spectrum Protect solution need to look like? What do I need to install, basically configure? What's my data protection estate going to look like? On the right side, obviously, there's the Spectrum Protect server. On the left, we have the vCenter. A couple things we need, though, in the middle here. The first thing is we are going to provide a user experience. We're going to extend the experience of the vSphere web client. So we're going to provide code, a little web server that it plugs into the vSphere web client to extend the functionality. So there's going to be a machine in the estate, and that's the one on the left, that's going to basically handle that traffic, to basically manage the user interface, the extension into the vSphere web client. You also need a machine, and it can be the same machine, that is an engine. We call them data movers, and their primary job is to move data out of the data stores in vSphere into the Spectrum Protect server, and that data represents the virtual machines. But you're going to be needing one or more depending on the size of your state. And then a third piece is for file level recovery. You're going to have a couple machines that are going to manage that process. We're going to focus on the first part of the equation, which is we need, obviously, the machine to extend the vSphere web client functionality, and that can also act as a data mover engine. And we might need, as I said, one or more data mover engines in addition. Now, the big question is not these are the pieces you need, but how many of these pieces do you need, and how do I solve that? So first, on the server side, hopefully you're all aware of the sizing blueprints that we have for Spectrum Protect servers. We basically give you T-shirt sizes, very prescriptive descriptions of how to build servers. We've translated that here into basically how much front-end data we believe you can protect. For example, if you have about 300 terabytes of front-end virtual machine estate, then that's probably a medium blueprint. If you have more than that, you're probably looking at a large blueprint server. So that's one part of the sizing equation. The other one is, well, gee, how many of these data mover engines do I need? How do I know, is one sufficient? Do I need more than that? So a couple of points here. First of all, there's a white paper out there that it's still very valid. It's very lengthy, a lot of math. If you want to work through it, you can get some very detailed information about how to size your state based on size of virtual machines, workload, how fast workload change, backup window, all these different variables you can plug in. What we're trying to do is make it simpler. We believe that you're going to really have to, at some point, monitor your environment. Even just to get basic input values like percent data daily change rate, you're going to end up having to monitor your environment. We're moving away from, here's a bunch of math you can go do, and we're moving towards general rule of thumb, which is, in this slide, it says 60 terabyte source data is a data mover. And actually, we're going to publish a short tech note. We're going to replace this white paper with a very short tech note that says, basically, this is our rule of thumb. Here are hardware specs for the data movers. Go build them, and then this should get you very close. You can monitor the environment at that point, and it's very easy, you'll see, to add, subtract data movers. In fact, we're going to update this recommendation with the changes, some of the optimizations we've been able to build into the product. We're looking at protecting about 100 terabyte source data per data mover. So it becomes very easy now for me to look at that first slide and say, well, I've got 150 terabytes of data that I need to protect, and I can do approximately 100 per data mover, so I need 2 data movers. Okay, installation real quick. The installation process, that is taking the installation media, installing the product on the first machine and the data movers, that has really fundamentally not changed. You will be launched into a web browser, which is that thing right here, the second thing on the right. After you install the product, it's going to walk you through configuration. That's going to take care of defining all the resources you need, nodes, etc., on the Spectrum Protect server. After that, you're going to launch yourself into the vSphere web client. And you're basically ready at this point. After you've done the install and the configure, you're basically ready to verify the environment, to verify you've installed data movers. Will they be able to do basic things like backup a virtual machine and recover a virtual machine? So I'm going to jump over to the demo machine real quick and show you how we're going to do that. So you'll notice when I log into the vSphere web client, we can pretend I just installed the product. There's a IBM Spectrum Protect badge there, and it gets you to a Get Started. And at this point of the installation, there's some additional information. You can click on these links to learn more. There's a Manage tab. We'll get back to that. But you can see after you've done the configuration, you should have essentially joined a vCenter, which is this FR demo, to a Spectrum Protect. So I have a connection here that's verified that represents a connection between a vCenter and a Spectrum Protect server. So I'm actually ready to go as far as doing some basic verification. Now, I mentioned that we are integrated into the vSphere web client. What does that mean? Well, that means just that. If I go, for example, and look for a machine to back up, whether, let's say, I just use the navigation that I'm used to in vSphere 6 in the vSphere web client, and this is all pure vSphere web client work right now. Just looking for virtual machines like I would as if I were managing them. And what I'm going to do is right-click, and you'll notice at the bottom, IBM Spectrum Protect, and there's a number of actions: backup, manage data protection, restore. So at this point, I can actually initiate a backup of this machine. And ask you one question: you want to do an incremental or full? You always want to do an incremental for the most part. Data mover has been already configured, so it should pick the best default. You hit OK, and you've got your first backup verified. Similarly, for recovery, after you've done the first backup, right-click Spectrum Protect app, and you'll be shown a calendar with your recovery points. So each day that's highlighted with a number on it is a recovery point for the virtual machine, and you can recover that virtual machine. I only have 2 in this particular case. I can go back to June 6th and start going through the wizard and recovering the virtual machine. And when you recover a virtual machine, it's very much like provisioning a virtual machine. So you'll notice that the workflow that we present to you looks and feels like, with a few exceptions, a provisioning workflow. You have to pick the data center, the data store, all that other stuff, or just simply take the defaults. The first step is just really to see that everything we've configured is working. We have a working data mover. We can back up. We can restore. We're actually ready to get into that next step. We've got our data movers. We've proven that we can do a backup and restore. We need one thing from our Spectrum Protect admin, and we need basically a schedule. Because the schedule sits on the Spectrum Protect server, we need Brad, our Spectrum Protect admin, to define a schedule for us that's going to back up virtual machines. In the past, we had to give Brad more instructions like, well, what's the schedule going to do? Who's the schedule going to talk to? Which data movers? Which virtual machines is going to back up? Those types of questions had to be built into the schedule rule. With 8.1, we're not going to define explicitly the rules for the schedule, what it's going to do, who's it going to talk to. We're going to let the vSphere inventory dictate then. So what we need Brad to do is basically create a schedule that gives a special keyword, schedule tag, and we'll understand what that means later. But it just basically means, server, don't worry about it. We're going to define the workload as we inspect vCenter inventory. So they need this special schedule set up. How do you do this? Well, it's very easy. If you happen to have an 8.1 OC installed in the environment, you can simply create a schedule. You go through the panels and you tell them you're going to create a schedule for your VMware infrastructure. You're going to tell it on the left there that it's a virtual machine schedule for VMware virtual machines. You're going to pick the data center node, which was the piece of inventory on the Spectrum Protect server that represents the data center. It was built for you when you ran through the configuration. You're going to do that. You're going to pick that one, and voila, as they say, you've got the schedule defined as you need it. Now, one very important point, Spectrum Protect version server 8.1 is not a prerequisite for this. Operations Center at 8.1 is not a prereq. Just pointing out, if you happen to have it, this is an easy way to define the schedule. If not, no problem. You do it through the command line, and you just simply tell it that this is a domain, the domain VM full. The instruction is schedule tag, which means don't worry about it right now. We're going to inspect the inventory and have the inventory dictate what gets backed up. Okay, at this point, I've got the schedule defined. If it ran, nothing's going to happen because it's not talking to anybody, so let's go take care of that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the UI. I'm going to go back into the IBM Spectrum Protect, go into Manage here, and I'm going to look at my schedules that Brad defined for me. He might have defined one or more. There might be some schedules, legacy schedules sitting around from prior to this, from some version of 7.1. How can you differentiate them? Well, there's this compatible flag, and that basically tells you if the schedule is compatible with this tagging mode that we're going to talk about. So I'd simply go here to this, let's say this schedule, and I would edit it. And at this point, it's going to tell me, well, Jim, you've got two data movers you've defined. Which data movers do you want assigned associated with the schedule? And I'd click them both. This is the schedule that's actually running, and they've already been checked. Through the UI, I've basically assigned these data movers to pick up work based on that schedule. So when that schedule kicks off in the middle of the night or whatever time, these two data movers are going to be ready to do work. Okay, we haven't defined any work yet. We're going to get there. But we're basically at this point ready to define the data protection policy. We're to the point where now we need to start defining the policy. And remember, I told you, in general, all customers don't want to back up their entire estate. There's legitimate reasons for skipping virtual machines. This particular environment, for example, they had SAP machines that they were backing up with another method. They had window file servers that they were using a different method. You have customers that have folks that don't pay for machines or cantankerous DBAs that they don't like and choose not to back up a virtual machine. Whatever the case, they're legitimate reasons. So the way we're going to approach this is we're going to, just like the customer use case, we're going to define the general rule first, and then we're going to go make the exceptions. The first thing we want to do is protect the data center. We want to create the general rule for protecting the data center. Into our vSphere Web Client UI, find the data center we want to protect here, and you can see there's a Configure tab. And if you had not configured this, you'd get a message to say, hey, we're not protecting this data center with Spectrum Protect. This has already been configured, but that's okay. If it hasn't been configured, you go into the Edit dialog. And basically, what you're telling it is, I want to protect this data center with Spectrum Protect. So that's the first question, exclude from backup. Obviously, that's no. You can do this at a folder level. You can do this at a resource pool, at a host cluster. Probably the best place to start, the way most people think about it, is protecting the data center. But we're not limited to just protecting the data center. and I pick the schedule. So I want to protect it. I want that schedule that Brad created for me, and then you pick the policy. I want to keep for 365 days or 90 days or 7 days. Yes, I want to back this data center up. I want it attached to the schedule that Brad created for me, and this is my policy, how long I want to keep. And again, this is the definition for 95, 98% of the virtual machines in that data center. If the schedule were to kick off right now, it's going to protect the whole data center. I know that's not what we want, but that's where we are right now in the process. It has assigned the 2 data movers because it's attached to the schedule. The 2 data movers are associated with it. We are going to balance the load between the 2 data movers. We're going to sort all the virtual machines by size, and then just round robin assign the virtual machines by size to each data mover. So at the end, they'll pretty much have a balanced load. And we're going to tell one of the data movers under the covers that you are the default data mover, and you, data mover number 1, are responsible for any new virtual machines that happen to pop up from here on out. Because of course, as soon as you define the schedule, someone's going to create a new virtual machine. By default, that virtual machine is going to be protected. We just have one of the data movers assigned with that specific task, besides its normal task. We've got the schedule associations created. We've load balanced the 2 data movers. If the schedule, again, the schedule to run right now, everything's going to be backed up. Now I need to define the exceptions, that very elusive part that was so hard to do before. Well, very simply, you can go to your virtual machine. Let's say I know that the CentOS machines I don't want backed up. So I can go and look at my Spectrum Protect data center that I'm protecting. Let's say my general rule is I don't back up anything that starts with CentOS. So I could just go right-click the 2 machines, hit IBM Spectrum Protect, manage data protection, and for these 2 virtual machines, that's only showing 1, but it works on a multi-select. I could make my exceptions now. I can exclude it from backup simply by saying exclude from backup, yes. I can change the retention policy. I can decide that I don't want this one for 365 days. This only needs to be kept for 7 days. I can change the data mover if I want. I can change the disk protection. For example, I can tell it I just want the system drive. It's got SQL on it. The DBA is doing a dump of that. I'm not interested in protecting all those other drives, just the system drives, or vice versa. I don't need the system drives because I've got templates and it's very easy to build a machine. I just need to protect the data. I can manage data consistency. That's the quiescing that is done when you take a snapshot. I can also manage application protection. Does this machine have SQL or Exchange inside the guest? And if so, I can do some magic with truncating log in addition to just putting the data in a consistent state. The point is, anything that you could do before in an option file is very easy now on a machine-by-machine basis or multi-select. You can change the policy. So I can go through and just say exclude from backup, no, and hit OK. The rule's been set now for the virtual machines. That's how easy it is to make exceptions. So I'm to the point now, I've defined my general rule, I've defined my exceptions. If the backup were to run tonight, it would protect only the virtual machines that I have selected, that 95, 98% of my state, again, that I've selected to be backed up. Note that in this entire presentation, not one time did I show you an option file. Did we have to look in an option file to set the data protection policy? How are we doing this? Well, the magic is we're simply exploiting the vSphere tagging infrastructure, which is just a simple way to put information on a virtual machine. This machine sent 2 that I'm backing up, or Frank IT, let's say. There's a tag that says I'm excluded. We're looking at this data center and we hit Frank IT. We don't have to back this virtual machine up. And the great thing about this is this information travels with the virtual machine. I can have 1 data mover, I can have 2 data movers, I can have 5 data movers. I don't need to put instructions in each data mover. The instructions are here on the virtual machine. They're here on the data center. If I look at the tags for the data center, for example, you'll see there's a scheduling tag. So that's the way we know that you run a schedule. How do I know what the schedule is supposed to protect? We go look for a tag that has that schedule name. It's not important for you to understand or to know about these tags. I'm just bringing it up just to tell you about the man behind the curtain. It is not our intent that customers look at these tags or manipulate these tags. They should be managing their data policy through all of the panels and wizards that I've shown you previously by just going to the machine, clicking on Data Protection, IBM Spectrum Protect Data Management, and following whatever the Backup Restore or the Data Management panel. If you have a use case that says, I only want to back up the system drive, or I want to back up everything but the system drive, it's become very simple. Through the panel I showed you for data protection, you go and just select the pull down. Your disk protection. So basically you can say all disks, or I can say disk 1 only, disk 0 only, or everything but disk 0. Those are the most popular use cases. If you have a use case outside of that, like you need to back up 3, 4, and 5 for whatever reason, then that's a place where you would still need to go in the option file. We build these interfaces to be simple and to cover a majority of what we believe are the primary use cases. And so there's always going to be exceptions. There's always going to be somebody's going to have an exception to the rule that says, well, I've got this very special situation. So again, simple cases, which we believe cover most of the customer's requirements, are right here. All disks except 1, only disk 1. And if you have a special requirement, you can still use the option file to specify that.
Hi, Jim.
Yeah.
Julian speaking. I think you can also highlight the fact that you are using the default tags that has been created as part of the setup through the DSM set tags command. But you can also create your own tag that SP4V will handle.
Yes, you can add in for advanced topics. You can certainly create tags, and you can figure out the names of the categories, which are consistent, and how we're naming tags. And you can start to do things with PowerShell, PowerCLI. Absolutely, but again, normal use case, you don't really need to concern yourself with tags. So real quick, let's get to monitoring. Just a couple things. Monitoring is built around this risk status, as I call it, tolerance for pain. You don't necessarily care that a virtual machine failed backup. A lot of customers, a lot of time, they're scheduling backups day in, day out. If a virtual machine misses one time, so what? It's going to back up the next day. There might be some Oracle machines or whatever, high-profile machines that your tolerance for pain is, in fact, 1 day. So the idea here, just like in the OC, you can set your risk status, your pain tolerance, on a per-machine basis. So you can go and say, in general, I don't care if I fail a backup. I do care after 3 days. So my risk status is, tell me about it when a virtual machine has failed after 3 days. Again, if you have special machines that you need a backup every day, you can set the risk status for 1 day. The beauty of that is, if you have 600 virtual machines, you don't want to look through the noise of the 598 virtual machines that succeeded, or the one virtual machine that failed that you don't really care about. You'll let it back up the next day. So when you go to the data center, you can monitor, you can sort by risk status. It will tell you if things are, I don't have anything that's outside of the risk status, but if something were surpassed my tolerance of pain, it would show up in red, and I can click on it, and I can get a short backup history of the virtual machine here in the bottom. Real quick, this is the same view, the same risk status, the same set of rules that are used in the OC. So you can pull up the view of the virtual machines in the OC and see basically the same information, regardless of Kev, the VMware administrator, said it, or Brad, the TSM administrator. Finally, load balance over time. The tech note that we're writing about data mover sizing with the general rule of thumb, we're going to spend some time in that tech note about monitoring. So we're going to focus the tech note not on how do you calculate the size, but we're going to give you the general, here's 100 terabytes, go do it. And then we're going to focus the article on how do I monitor that? How do I know if that 2 data movers is sufficient? The good news is, if it's not, if at some point you need to either rebalance the work because a lot of virtual machines have been created and the one data mover that's default is picking up more workload, or you need an added virtual machine, you can go back to this home panel, go back into your schedule. If I simply wanted to rebalance the data movers, I would just click this box, and it would rebalance the workload across the two data movers. It's basically going through an exercise of manipulating the tags on the data movers. It's not a high resource intensive action, meaning that when in doubt, you can just go do this. If you need a third data mover, you'd go through the configuration wizard that you did at the initial setup. Through the config wizard, you define that piece of inventory to the Spectrum Protect server and install the data mover. You'll put the option file on it, get the services set up. Once you've done that, it's going to pop up here as a third data mover. You'd simply check it, and again, voila, you've now got 3 data movers assigned to this task instead of 2 data movers. Thank you all.